The boy was 17 years old, and he was trying very hard not to cry in front of a man who would use it against him. He was standing in the middle of the Mojave Star gas station and diner, the only building for 47 miles in either direction on Highway 93, and the man in front of him was named Cutter Voss. And Cutter Voss was the kind of man who had learned early and completely that other people's fear was a resource to be harvested. The boy's name was Danny Reeves. He was 17, slight, with the particular thinness of a kid who'd been growing fast and eating whatever was available, which in his case had not always been much. His hands were the hands of someone who worked calloused on the palms, nicked across the knuckles, the kind of hands that belong on a man twice his age. He'd been working at the Mojave Star since he was 15, first washing dishes, then pumping gas when the other attendant quit, then running the register when his mother needed to sleep because she'd been on her feet since 5 in the morning. And it was now past midnight, and the highway never fully stopped. He was standing in the middle of the diner, with his chin up and his hands at his sides. And Cutter Voss was 3 feet away, telling him something that made the color drain from his face and then come back. It's something harder, but we'll get to that, because there was a man at the counter who was watching all of this. A man who had come in 40 minutes earlier for coffee and a belt inspection on his Road King, who had settled onto the corner stool with the quiet of someone accustomed to occupying spaces without disturbing them, and who had been watching the room with the particular attention of a person who has learned that the most important things that happen in any given space are usually not the things that are loudest. His name was Marcus Webb. He was 50 years old, and he had seen this kind of thing before. He set down his coffee, cupped up very carefully. The sound it made on the Formica counter was soft, barely a sound at all. But in the particular silence that had fallen over the Mojave Star diner, in the last 30 seconds, it was enough. Marcus Webb had been fixing motorcycles for 23 years. His shop was in Kingman, Arizona, a building he'd bought cheap in 2001, when Kingman was even less than it currently was, which was itself considerably less than most people expected from a town on Route 66. The building had been a feed store, then a tire shop, then nothing for 11 years. And Marcus had bought it for the concrete floor and the ceiling height and that stubborn conviction that a man who was good at fixing things should have a place to do it. He was good at fixing things, not just mechanically. Though that was real and substantial, there were riders who brought their bikes from Flagstaff, from Las Vegas, from Prescott, from places further than that, because Marcus Webb's hands understood internal combustion, the way some people understand music, intuitively, completely, the way you understand something you were born near and grew up with and have spent your adult life deepening your relationship to. But that wasn't the whole of it. On the first Saturday of every month, Marcus opened the shop at 7 in the morning and worked until the last bike was done, and he charged nothing. Not a dollar, not a cup of coffee, not a favor. The only requirement to bring your motorcycle to Marcus Webb's first Saturday shop was that you had served in the United States military. He'd been doing this since 2002. He'd fixed, by his own rough count, somewhere north of 400 motorcycles, Harley-Davidsons and Hondas and Kawasaki's and Triumphs, and one ancient BMW that an 81-year-old Korean War veteran had ridden from Scottsdale because someone had told him about Marcus, and he'd decided the story was worth checking. Marcus had spent 9 hours on that BMW and charged the man nothing and refused every attempt at payment. And when the old veteran had finally asked why all of it, why the free shop, why every first Saturday, why 400 bikes across 23 years, Marcus had said the same thing. He said every time someone asks, no reason, he said, I just liked the work. Nobody believed him, nobody pushed, because there was something in Marcus Webb's face when he said it, not a lie. Exactly, but a door with the key turned in it, and the kind of man who turns a key in a door and says no reason is the kind of man whose reasons are not a story, is ready to tell. The actual reason lived in a photograph that Marcus kept in the top drawer of the tool chest in the back of his shop, under a box of drill bits and a spare set of keys to a truck he no longer owned. The photograph was of 2 men in desert camouflage, standing in front of a vehicle somewhere in Iraq, squinting against flat white light. Both men were grinning. Both men were 22 years old. One of them was Marcus Webb. The other was a man named Darnell Reeves, who had been Marcus's squad mate and closest friend from the second week of basic training through the last day of the deployment, who had died on a Tuesday morning in Fallujah from an IED that Marcus had been walking 3 steps behind him when it detonated. 3 steps that were the difference between a photograph in a drawer and a flag folded in a triangle. Darnell Reeves had a sister in Nevada. Her name was Carol, and Carol Reeves had a son named Danny. Marcus had driven to Nevada once, in 2005, to meet Carol and the baby she'd been pregnant with when Darnell died, and he had sat in her kitchen and held a child who had his father's ears and his father's way of tilting his head when he was thinking, and he had made a promise to Darnell Reeves that Darnell Reeves would never hear, but that Marcus Webb would spend the rest of his life keeping. He had not told Caro why he fixed bikes for free. He had not told her about the photograph. He had driven away from that kitchen in 2005, and he had fixed motorcycles on First Saturdays, and he had kept his quiet watch from a distance, a check at Christmas, a call on Danny's birthday, a careful presence that cost him nothing visible and everything invisible. He was in Nevada now because Danny had called him 3 weeks ago, and Danny's voice on the phone had the specific quality of someone who was not asking for help, but who was run out of everything else. Marcus had gotten on his bike. The Mojave Star gas station and diner had been built in 1962 by a man named Earl Comstock, who had looked at a stretch of Nevada highway and put the particular vision of someone who understands loneliness as a business opportunity. That people crossing the desert needed a place to stop, and that there was not one for 90 miles. He'd been right. The Mojave Star had survived because it had to, not because it thrived. Not because it was beloved, but because the desert made it necessary, and necessity is a more durable foundation than affection. The building itself was a long single-story structure that had been painted white at some point in the past and was now the color of the desert around it, a pale tan, sun-bleached and wind-worn, with a roof that sagged slightly in the middle, like a man who's been standing a long time. The gas pumps out front were the kind that still had the old-style analog dials, updated once in the 90s and not since. Behind the building, a pair of diesel pumps for the trucks that came through on the long hauls, the kind of trucks that crossed Nevada the way ships crossed ocean committed. Methodical, alone. Inside, the diner half occupied the left 2/3 of the building. 8 booths along the window wall, a counter with 9 stools, a kitchen that produced food in the category of honest rather than good, the kind of food that exists to refuel rather than delight, and that delivers on that promise reliably if without enthusiasm. The lighting was fluorescent, one of the tubes perpetually on the edge of failing and buzzing with the particular frequency of something that has been ignored too long. The floor was linoleum in a pattern that had been modern once. The walls held the remnants of what the Mojave Star had once imagined about itself. Photographs of Route 66 in its glory days. A mounted jackrabbit that someone had placed sunglasses on at some point, and that had remained sunglassed for what appeared to be decades. A hand-painted sign near the register that said, "We've been here since 1962, and we're not going anywhere," with an optimism that the pit building's current condition had some trouble supporting. Carol Reeves had been running the Mojave Star for 11 years. She'd come here with a baby on her hip and $300 and a desperation that had nothing left to be proud about. And she'd worked for the previous owner for 6 years and bought him out when his health failed, because the alternative was watching the only thing she'd built get sold to someone who wouldn't keep it. She was 43 years old now, and the Mojave Star was hers, and the debt on it was real, and the margins were narrow, and the highway brought enough traffic to survive, and not quite enough to do anything else. It was the only home Danny had ever known, and 1 week from that Tuesday morning, if something didn't change, the bank was going to take it. Danny Reeves had been 17 years old for 4 months, and he moved through the Mojave Star like a man who had been maintaining something important for a long time and knew it needed him. He had his father's ears. Marcus had seen it the moment he walked in that slight forward angle, the tilt of attention that Darnell had when he was listening to something he considered worth listening to. Danny's eyes were his mother's, dark, direct, the kind that understood situations quickly and filed them accurately. He had the body of someone who'd grown up doing physical work, and the face of someone who'd grown up faster than the work. He pumped gas without being asked when a truck pulled in. He bussed tables without waiting to be told. He refilled coffee cups by memory, knowing which customers took it black, which wanted cream, which wanted the cup left alone. He did all of this with the quiet competence of someone who has never been in a position to coast. His mother worked the morning shift, Danny worked the afternoon into the evening. Between them they covered most of the hours the Mojave Star needed covering, with a part-time cook named Bernardo who came in 4 days a week, and a woman named Phyllis who worked the register on weekends, and who was 73 years old and had been working at the Mojave Star for longer than Carol had owned it. Phyllis was sitting in the corner booth when Cutter Voss walked in. But we'll get to Phyllis, because Danny deserves to be understood, before the moment that defined him in that diner. 3 months before that Tuesday, a man named Cutter Voss had come to Carol Reeves with a proposal. He controlled the flow of certain products along a certain stretch of Highway 93, not drugs. At least not primarily, but the kind of small-scale extortion that highway towns are vulnerable to. Protection money, he called it, though what he was protecting against was primarily himself. He wanted a percentage of the Mojave Star's monthly revenue in exchange for the assurance that nothing would happen to the building, the pumps, the staff, or the supply chain that kept the diner's kitchen running. Carol had said no. What followed was 6 weeks of things happening. A fuel delivery truck that arrived 3 days late, a health inspection that found violations that had not previously existed and were suspiciously specific, a rock through the window of the storage shed at 2 in the morning. Nothing that could be directly connected to Cutter Voss, nothing that constituted legal proof of anything, but Carol was 1 week away from missing a loan payment that she could not miss. Danny had found out about the arrangement 3 weeks ago, found out by overhearing a conversation his mother thought he'd missed. The way children who have grown up in small spaces learn to be invisible in them. He'd confronted her. She'd tried to minimize it. He'd pushed. And Carol Reeves, who was exhausted and frightened and 43 years old and had been holding everything together by herself for 17 years, had finally told him the truth. Danny had listened to all of it. Then he'd gone to Cutter Voss himself. He'd told Voss that his mother had nothing to do with it anymore, that Danny was the one making the decisions at the Mojave Star now, that any arrangement Voss wanted to have, he could have it with Danny. He'd done this because he was 17 years old, and loved his mother completely, and had not yet learned a specific lesson about which problems you can absorb, and which ones absorb you. Voss had taken the offer, and now, 3 weeks later, Voss was here to collect. Voss was 47 years old, and had been running his particular operation along this stretch of Highway 93 for 9 years. He was not large. This surprised people who hadn't met him, because he expected, from the reputation, something physically imposing. What they got was a man of medium height and medium build, with a face that was almost entirely unremarkable except for the eyes, which were the color of old dishwater and had the specific quality of eyes that are always doing arithmetic. He dressed neatly, he spoke quietly. He had a talent for making his requests sound like observations, his threats sound like concern, and his extraction of money sound like a mutual arrangement between reasonable parties. He came into the Mojave Star at 3:47 on a Tuesday afternoon with one man behind him, a large quiet person named Grice, who stood near the door and did not sit down. The diner had 4 other customers, 2 truckers at the counter, not paying attention, a family of 4 in the far booth, road-weary and focused on their food, and Phyllis, in her usual corner booth, who was 73 years old, and whose presence Voss had long since stopped registering as relevant. Voss sat down at the counter to stools from Marcus. Webb, he didn't look at Marcus, he looked at Danny, who had come out of the kitchen with a bus tub and who stopped when he saw Voss and set the bus tub down on the nearest table with a control that cost him something visible. Danny, Voss said. Pleasant. You got a minute? Danny came to the counter. He stood on the service side, which put the counter between them, which was both practical and, Marcus's thought, quietly intelligent. Mr. Voss, I want to talk about the arrangement. Voss settled on the stool with the ease of a man in a place he considers his. Specifically, I want to talk about the fact that the arrangement has been in place for 3 weeks, and I have yet to receive the first payment. We're working on it, Danny said. That's what you said last week. We had a slow week. You had a slow week, Voss repeated, tasting the words. Danny, we had an agreement. I know, and an agreement that doesn't get honored, that creates a problem. He said this conversationally, as if they were discussing a scheduling conflict. Not just for you, for your mother, for this place. He glanced around the diner with the expression of a man appraising something he's already decided the value of. It'd be a shame if this place had more problems. We'll have it, Danny said. His voice was steady. By Friday. I need it today. We don't have it today. Then we have a problem. Voss leaned slightly forward. You want to know what the problem is? The problem is that I've been patient. 3 weeks, Danny. I've been very patient. And patience in my line of work has a cost. So the amount we discussed 3 weeks ago, it's gone up. He named a number. Danny went still. The number was more than the Mojave Star made in a month. That's not what we agreed to, Danny said quietly. Agreements evolve, Voss said. Especially when one party keeps not showing up. I can't pay that. Then your mother is going to lose this place. Simple. Final. The tone of a man stating whether. Danny's jaw tightened. His hands, flat on the counter, pressed down. And that was when Marcus Webb set down his coffee cup. The sound was soft, but Voss heard it. He turned his head. Marcus Webb was 55 years old, with hands that had spent 30 years in engine grease, and forearms that reflected it, and a face that was the color and texture of someone who had spent significant portions of his life outdoors and didn't particularly mind. He was wearing a plain grey Henley and jeans and boots, and there was nothing about him that announced anything except a quality of stillness that the room noticed before his voice did. How much is the original amount? Marcus said. He was looking at Danny. Danny looked at him, the quick assessment of someone deciding whether this was help or a new complication. He must have decided something, because he told him. Marcus nodded once. He reached into the inside pocket of his jacket, which was hanging on the stool beside him, and he put an envelope on the counter. That should cover it, he said. The original amount, the agreed amount. He looked at Voss now, and his voice stayed exactly the same, flat, even, without heat. Not the new number. The number this kid agreed to 3 weeks ago, before someone decided that patience had a surcharge. The diner had gone the specific quiet of a space where everyone is pretending not to listen. Voss looked at the envelope, looked at Marcus. Did the arithmetic that was always happening behind his dishwater eyes. I don't know you, Voss said. No, Marcus said. You don't. This isn't your business. I'm making it my business. He said it the way you state a fact about the weather. The kid took on something that wasn't his to take on because he was trying to protect his mother. That's what that is. I'm not going to sit on a stool and drink coffee and watch someone shake down a 17-year-old for doing that. Voss was quiet for a moment. Then the almost smile appeared, the one that wasn't warmth but was shaped like it. You know what happens? Voss said quietly, to people who get involved in things that aren't their business, in this part of the highway. I imagine I'm about to find out, Marcus said. He didn't move, didn't shift, didn't adjust his posture in any of the ways that men adjust their posture when they're preparing for physical confrontation. He just sat on the stool with his coffee and looked at Voss with the absolute equanimity of a man who has looked at dangerous things before and developed a permanent calibration for them. Grice near the door straightened slightly. Marcus glanced at him, then back at Voss. Here's what I want you to understand, he said. I came in here for coffee and a belt check on my bike. I don't want trouble. I'm not looking for a confrontation. But that kid, he nodded toward Danny, who was standing very still behind the counter with his hands flat on the surface and his face unreadable. That kid watched his mother get backed into a corner and he stepped in front of it because he didn't know what else to do. He's 17. He doesn't owe you money. His mother doesn't owe you money. You manufactured a situation and then put a price on it. He picked up his coffee, drank from it. So I'm going to sit here, Marcus said, and you're going to take the envelope with the original amount, the amount that was agreed to before. You decided patience had a tax, and you're going to leave. And then he paused. You and I are going to have a longer conversation about whether this arrangement continues at all. Voss looked at him for a long time. You don't know what you're walking into, Voss said. Probably not, Marcus said. But I know what I'm walking toward. Voss took the envelope, not because he was afraid of Marcus Webb, or not only because of that. He took it because the arithmetic in his dishwater eyes had run a calculation that said, wait, find out who this is. Adjust accordingly. He said, we'll finish this conversation outside. After I'd finished my coffee, Marcus said. Voss left. Grice followed. The door swung shut behind them. The diner exhaled. The family in the far booth had gone very still during the exchange, and now the mother was quietly herding them toward the door, with the focused efficiency of a woman who has decided that the rest of this meal can happen somewhere else. The two truckers at the counter had developed an intense interest in their pie that they maintained without looking up. Danny came out from behind the counter. He stood in front of Marcus, and for a moment he didn't say anything. because there wasn't a sentence that started correctly for what he was trying to say. "You knew my father," he said finally. It wasn't a question. Marcus looked at him. Something moved in his face. Not surprise, but the particular shift of a man who has been carrying a weight for a long time and has just had someone offer, unexpectedly, to help him put it down. "Yes," he said. "Darnell Reeves." "Yes?" Danny nodded slowly. He'd been 17 years old for 4 months, and he had his father's ears and his father's tilt of attention and something else now in his face, something that wasn't quite grief and wasn't quite recognition, but was somewhere between them. In the territory that opens up when you finally understand that certain debts of love run invisible for years before they surface. "Mom knows you come through sometimes," Danny said. "She always said," he stopped. "She always said you didn't have to. That you didn't know us anything." "She's right," Marcus said. "I don't owe you anything." He set down the coffee cup. "That's not why I come." They sat in that for a moment. Then Danny said, "Voss isn't going to let this go. The amount you paid, he'll say it's not enough. He'll add the surcharge back on. He'll come back with more people. He always does." His voice was steady, but the knowledge behind it was heavy. "Mama's 9 days before the bank payment. Even if Voss disappeared tonight, we still don't have the money." "I know," Marcus said. "So what do we do?" Marcus was quiet for a moment. He turned the coffee cup in his hands, a habit Carol noticed later that he had when he was thinking, turning things slowly, getting the full rotation before deciding. "I made a call this morning," he said, "before I came in. When you told me the situation, I called some people." "What people?" Marcus looked at him. "People who owed me some first Saturdays." What happened outside the Mojave Star in the next 40 minutes was the part of the story that Phyllis Garner recorded on her phone. Phyllis was 73 years old. She had worked at the Mojave Star for 14 years. She drove in from her house in Boulder City 4 days a week in a 2009 Civic that she referred to as the Enterprise, and which had 211,000 miles on it and showed no signs of stopping. She sat in the corner booth during her breaks with a cup of tea and a paperback mystery novel, and had, over 14 years of sitting in that corner booth, developed the kind of observational habit that comes from being repeatedly in a room where people forget you're there. She had been recording since Voss walked in. She had not announced this. She had simply taken her phone from her purse, opened the camera, set it against her tea mug with the lens facing outward, and pressed record. She had done this because 14 years of watching the Mojave Star had taught her exactly what Cutter Voss was and what he did, and because she was 73 years old and had buried her husband and raised 3 children and survived a cancer, diagnoses that her doctors had initially characterized as serious, and she had arrived, through all of it, at the particular freedom of a woman who has stopped being afraid of the consequences of doing the right thing. She'd recorded all of it, every word, Voss's voice, clearly audible, the amounts, the threats, the phrase, "It'd be a shame if this place had more problems," the surcharge, all of it, in a video that was 11 minutes and 43 seconds long and was filmed in the fluorescent light of a Nevada desert diner with the clarity of a modern smartphone camera, which is to say, clearly enough. When Voss came back 20 minutes later with 3 more men, having made calls of his own from the parking lot, having decided that the calculation had changed and that Marcus Webb needed to be addressed more directly, Phyllis was still recording. She recorded Voss coming through the door. She recorded Marcus standing up from the stool. She recorded the sound of motorcycles in the parking lot, not 1 or 2, but a sustained rolling arrival. Engines announcing themselves the way engines do when there are enough of them and they arrive together with the harmony of machines that have been traveling the same road. She recorded the moment the door opened again. Not Voss's men this time, and the first of the riders came in. 11 of them. Some Marcus's age, some older, some younger. Men who had received a call that morning from a number they recognized and had gotten on their bikes without a lot of questions asked because Marcus Webb had fixed their motorcycles on first Saturdays for years, and when Marcus Webb called and said, "I need people," the people came. They came in and they stood. Some in booths, some at the counter, some along the wall near the door. They didn't block Voss's men, they simply occupied the space, the way 11 riders occupy a space, with the physical reality of people who have decided to be present and are not going to be moved from that decision. Voss stood in the center of the diner and looked at this. He looked at the riders. He looked at Marcus. He looked at the corner booth. where Phyllis Garner was sitting with her tea and her phone and the serene expression of a woman watching something arrive at its correct conclusion. "She's been recording since you walked in the first time," Marcus said. "Every word." Voss said nothing. "Extortion," Marcus said, "specifically and clearly. Name, amount, threat, all of it. 11 minutes and 43 seconds of it." He tilted his head. "You want to know something? She already sent it. Before he came back in. She sent it to 3 people, her nephew, who's a news producer in Las Vegas, the Nevada Attorney General's public tip line, and a Facebook group she's in for local Nevada news that has about 60,000 members." He paused. "That was 18 minutes ago." Phyllis turned her phone around so Voss could see the screen. 412 shares. The number was climbing. By 5 o'clock that afternoon, the video had been watched 40,000 times. By 6, a reporter from the Las Vegas Review had called the Mojave Star's landline, and Carol Reeves, who had come in from the back when she heard the motorcycles, had answered the phone and been asked questions. She answered honestly and completely, because honesty was the only mode she had left, and she was too tired for anything else. By 7, a Nevada State Police cruiser was parked in the Mojave Star lot and 2 investigators were taking statements. Voss had left the diner before the cruisers arrived. He'd walked out with Grice and his 3 other men in the particular silence of people who have just watched a situation rotate entirely out of their control and are calculating, furiously, whether running looks better or worse than staying. He'd gotten in his truck and driven east on Highway 93. He didn't get far. The Nevada AG's office had been watching Voss for 14 months. The tip line wasn't the first complaint they'd received about operations along his stretch of highway, just the first one with video. By 8 p.m., Voss was in a Nevada State Police interview room in Las Vegas, and by the time the Desert Dark had fully arrived over Highway 93, his lawyer was making phone calls that were not going well. His operation, which had run on the specific gasoline of other people's fear, cleft with the speed of things that were only ever held together by the belief that no one was watching. Someone had been watching, someone who was 73 years old, and drove a 2009 Civic with 211,000 miles on it, and had stopped being afraid of consequences a long time ago. At the Mojave Star, the evening was different from other evenings, in the specific way that evenings are different. When something has broken correctly after a long time going the wrong way. Carol Reeves was behind the counter, which was where she was always found. But she was moving differently, not the conserved motion of someone managing scarcity, but the motion of someone who has put something down. The riders ate dinner. Phyllis had a second cup of tea. Danny moved through the diner, doing what Danny always did, but with his shoulders at a different angle than they'd been for 3 months. Marcus sat at the counter. Carol came and stood across from him during a quiet moment, and she looked at him for a while before she spoke. "Darnell used to talk about you," she said. "He said you were the kind of person who showed up. He said that was rarer than it sounded." "He was right that it's rare," Marcus said. "Why didn't you tell me? About the free Saturdays? About why?" Marcus turned the coffee cup in his hands. "Because it wasn't a debt," he said finally, "and I didn't want it to feel like one. To you or Danny, what I do on Saturdays, that's mine. That's between me and your brother. It doesn't have anything to do with you owing me anything." He looked up. "You built this place. You kept it. 11 years in the middle of the desert, with nothing but the highway, and whatever it brought you, you kept it. That's not Darnell's work. That's yours." Carol was quiet for a moment. "The bank payment," she said. "I talked to Bernardo and Phyllis while you were on the phone," Marcus said. "There are 11 riders in your diner who are going to order the dinner special and leave tips that are going to look like a math error. And there's a news story about to run in Las Vegas. That's going to put the Mojave Star on the map in a way that's going to bring people off the highway for the next 6 months, out of pure curiosity." He picked up his coffee. "I think you'll make the payment." She looked at him for a long time. "Hugh fixed his bike," she said. "Every first Saturday for 23 years. When I could find it," Marcus said. "Some of those vets have very difficult bikes." Carol Reeves laughed. It was the laugh of a woman releasing something she'd been holding for a long time, and it filled the Mojave Star diner with a sound at the fluorescent lights and the jackrabbit, with sunglasses and the sign about being here since 1962, had not heard in a while. Pure and unguarded and real. Danny was watching from the kitchen pass through. He was watching Marcus Webb, who was 55 years old and fixed motorcycles on first Saturdays and had never told anyone why. who had driven across the Nevada desert because a kid had called him and he had made a promise 17 years ago to a man who would never hear. It kept. Danny reached into his apron pocket. He took out a photograph. Old, worn at the edges, the kind of photograph that has been looked at many times. Two men in desert camouflage, squinting into flat white light. Grinning. He'd found it in his mother's kitchen drawer years ago and asked about it, and Carol had said simply, "That's your Uncle Darnell, and the other one is a friend of his who looks out for us." Danny set the photograph on the counter in front of Marcus. Marcus looked at it for a long time. He didn't pick it up. He just looked at it, the way you look at something that holds too much to be casually handled. Then he looked up at Danny. "He'd be proud of you," Marcus said. The way he stepped in front of it. "For your mom." That took. He stopped. Tried. Again. That took the specific kind of courage that doesn't know it's being courageous. It just does the thing because the thing needs doing. He pushed the photograph gently back toward Danny. He had that too. Exactly like that. Danny picked up the photograph. He put it back in his apron pocket. He went back into the kitchen. Marcus finished his coffee. He stayed for dinner. He left at 9 o'clock. When the lot was quiet and the highway was doing what it always did, running straight through the dark in both directions toward things that couldn't be seen from the middle. He got on his Road King, sat for a moment in the silence before the engine. Then he rode west. There's a word people use when they talk about men like Marcus Webb. Intimidating. They say it because of the patch, because of the bikes, because of what they've decided a man who rides looks like before they've met one. They'll say it because fear of the unfamiliar is the most efficient shortcut the brain has invented. And the brain takes shortcuts whenever it can. And here's what I want to say about that. Marcus Webb spent 23 years fixing motorcycles for free on first Saturdays. He drove across Nevada because a 17-year-old called him. He sat on a stool and watched a situation long enough to understand it, and then he put his coffee cup down and said what needed to be said. He did not do any of this because a biker. He did it because he was a man who had looked at a photograph in a drawer for 23 years and had decided, in the way that certain decisions get made, quietly, finally, without announcement, that the life of the man in that photograph was not going to have been wasted while Marcus Webb had something to say about it. People tell me they're surprised. When men like Marcus do things like this, I'm not surprised. I've known too many of them. The ones who show up, the ones who sit in diners and red rooms and put down coffee cups at exactly the right moment. They're not a type. They're not a patch or a club or a demographic. They're a choice. Made once, then again, until it becomes the only choice available because all the other ones got closed off by who you decided to be. The road shows you a lot of people. Most of them are trying. The ones who have really figured something out. The ones worth knowing, worth trusting, worth riding beside. They're not fearless. They're not invincible. They're not even always right. They just don't look away. Phyllis Garner pressed record before anyone told her to. Marcus Webb drove across Nevada because a kid called him, and Danny Reeves stood in front of something too big for him because his mother was behind him, and there was nobody else. So that's 3 people who didn't look away in a diner in the Nevada desert, and a 17-year-old kid's mother still has her building. The road keeps moving. I'll see you on it.